What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Common Sense, the podcast. Sorry we weren't able to join in here with you guys last week, but we're back. And I'm super excited for this show because this is more kind of along my personal journey and where I'm trying to go right now. And I didn't think this guy would say yes. I really thought he was going to be like, nah, I don't know if I really want to do that. And he was actually like, yeah, I'm down. I was like, that's crazy. But anyways, you guys, welcome my friend, Anthony Yeung. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just glad to be here. I'm kind of excited to be my first cigar lounge. Haven't really stepped foot in one before. So
That's awesome. So what do you think so far?
I like the vibe. I mean, it's definitely a man cave, which I like, which is a way to just kind of disconnect from everything outside. Definitely something I'll check more. I don't know about the cigar aspect yet.
Yeah.
Just talking about you trying to learn more about cigars. But yeah, no, I want to learn more. So
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to give you the tour because we got to talking, and then before we knew it, it was already time to go. So I will have to do that after the show and really show you all around. But so for everybody that doesn't know who Anthony Yeung is, tell us a little bit about yourself and growing up, where you grew up, where you're from. Just give everybody a little bit of rundown background on yourself.
Sure. So most people don't know that I'm actually Canadian. Yeah, so I grew up in Canada, born in Thornhill, went to school in Thornhill, did high school, and in high school, when I started to apply for colleges, I had the option to either go to school in Canada or come to Texas. Just really kind of out of, hey, what the heck? I just chose Texas and went to Texas, and that's how I made myself to Texas. I mean, I've always studied a technical field. I was always kind of gravitating to like mathematics, science, computer science. So I kind of studied more of a technical track, but I never really had any real estate background. But kind of the joke is that when I'm in Canada and I see my friends, I usually tell them I'm American, right? I don't want anything associated with being in Canada. And then when I'm in the States, I'm usually telling everyone I'm Canadian. So I'm kind of like
Incognito.
Exactly, in between. So, but yeah.
What province is that?
Ontario.
Okay, Ontario.
Yeah.
I've been to Montreal, but I have not been to Ontario.
No, I have relatives in Montreal, but I mean, it was kind of a culture shift because, in Canada, or at least in Toronto, it's like 80% cloudy. You got extreme winters. And then when you come to Texas, I first came here probably around June, July, so in the dead heat. I was just like, how is it possible I'm sweating? Just walking from from the mall to my car.
Yeah.
So I really hated it, but after maybe the 2-year mark, it grew on me. So.
Right on. What was your childhood like growing up?
So my parents, So I lived in the suburbs. It was pretty comfortable. My parents were more immigrants. They came. I was considered first generation. I was born there. Just lived in the suburbs. I was kind of really sheltered in just the suburbs mostly. But yeah, I mean, played a lot of sports. Most of the time, my parents would just be working. I just kind of leave the house, gone for long periods of time, and then come back and hopefully I'll make it back in time for dinner. But yeah, I'd say it's a pretty normal childhood.
Yeah, brothers, sisters?
I have an older sister. She's 3 years older. She's still up in Canada. She's a teacher over there. I haven't exactly made it back ever since we had kids. So, maybe I'm hoping one time, maybe I'll make it back. I actually have a friend's wedding in July that I might try to make it back for. But that will probably be the first time in 10 years.
Wow, you haven't been back in 10 years?
No, yeah. I mean, it's, so we don't have any family here at all. So
Yeah.
it was me and my wife raising our kids, having 3 kids here by ourselves. I mean, just that is even a story by itself where, she's, giving birth, have no family support, just kind of friends, making it back and forth and trying to, make ends meet and just coordinate schedules. We've just been accustomed to kind of doing everything ourselves. And our family's in Canada.
Both of your families are in Canada?
No, so my parents are in Canada. Hers is in Asia. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That's a pretty cool dynamic, and I can see where that already leads you down certain paths. Just kind of.
Well, actually, I think that's kind of why my wife and I kind of click, is because we actually don't have any family here. So we kind of found our own way through college, jobs, without having any family.
Yeah.
So we've always just kind of created our own family, and right now we consider Texas our home.
That's awesome, man. How much the same of moving around a lot and stuff like that. So yeah, we don't have any other family here in Texas. Well, I say that, but like my older brother lives here still. But yeah, that's really interesting, man, that you chose Texas of all places.
So the background is that when I was in high school, my dad had a work opportunity in Texas. So they actually sponsored him for a green card. So by the time my senior year came around, where I started applying, I had the opportunity to actually study in Texas because my dad was here going through the green card process. So I had that advantage of applying considered as in-state because my citizenship, or at least my green card, would actually be through him in his work.
Yeah.
So when I was, in college, I was, I got accepted to, several universities in Toronto. And then I also had the opportunity to apply to colleges in Texas because he was here, commuting back and forth. And I don't exactly know what my thought process was, but I think it was more so that there just seemed to be a lot more unknown opportunity, going to somewhere that I completely had no experience of. Toronto, I grew up there, right?
Yeah.
I kind of knew it. I knew all my friends. I knew the culture. I knew everything. I knew the universities. So, out of naivety, I just said, yeah, let's just go, right? So I kind of went through that entire, standardized testing process, applied, and got in, and just that's how it kind of ended up here. So not necessarily like, hey, man, I really want this. It was more like there was an opportunity, saw it, took it, and that's how I ended up in Texas. And the funny thing is that when I got to Texas and got settled in, he retired and moved back to Canada. So that's how my parents ended up staying in Canada. And then I just kind of stayed here by myself in Texas.
So where did you choose to go to school, and what did you decide to major in?
So I graduated from UT Austin. I studied computer science. Like I mentioned, I had an inclination to more of a technical field. The funny thing is that right in my senior year, the courses that I was taking was extremely hard, like crazy hard. Like you actually had to program your own operating system, all the way to the bits and bytes to be able to figure out how to do copy and paste, right? Like you and I, copy and paste is so easy, but if you actually look at the lower level code, you're like, oh my gosh, I took an operating system class, saw that, and the funny thing is, after that class, on my last semester, I'm like, man, I don't want to do this for a living. So my perception of what being a programmer was in the workforce was that class, and I felt like my back almost broke from that. And at that time, my hair, whatever hair I had, was let go. I wasn't taking care of myself. So I was like, man, this is pretty miserable. But the funny thing is that kind of went through that experience, just decided to graduate. And the funny thing is that when I was actually looking for a job, I was like, man, I don't want to program, right? But then again, I was like, I just need a job to get paid for. And the funny thing is that when I was, so they have 2 career fairs. They have one in fall and then one in spring, and usually the same employers go to both. So I went to the one in fall, went through the entire interview process, got some offers, and come springtime, they have the same employers there. So I didn't really see much benefit in really kind of dressing up, making an impression. So, you know, some of my friends who were still kind of looking for a job went, and I decided to company on them. But the thing was, it was really right after I went to the gym, play basketball, right? So I really didn't care. I wasn't really there for a job. I was really wearing my baller shorts, t-shirt and stuff, walking through the career fair. And there was this really long line for one of the employers, which was Cisco, that my friend wanted to, you know, have their 5 minutes talk with whoever was at the booth. And I just kind of waited for him. I was like, all right, so while he's waiting in line with all the kids with, or all the students with suits, you know, dress to impress, I just kind of go straight to the front of the booth where the table was just to see what they had, right? Just, you know, freebies, like poor college kid. What can I bum off of them? And there was a guy there just kind of sitting there eating his lunch, and I just kind of say, hey, man, what's going on? You know, struck a conversation with him. What I didn't know was he was actually a hiring manager in one of the locations for Cisco. And I was just talking to him just to kind of like buy time for my friend to make it through the line. And I felt kind of bad because I interrupted his lunch. He was wiping his mouth, and I was like, hey, man, I'm sorry, you know, just chatting. He's like, I could go away. He's like, no, it's fine. So I was just chatting with him and, you know, just shooting the breeze. And as my friend kind of went through the line, then talked to the recruiter and then took off, I was like, hey, man, it's good talking to you. I'll see you later, or not, but just kind of shooting the breeze. I left. And the strangest thing was that he actually came back and tapped my shoulder while I was kind of going to the other booth with my friend. It's like, hey, man, here's my card. Just email me your resume. I'm like, oh, okay. Didn't really think much about it. But long story short, he ended up being my first manager. So
wow.
I actually, yeah, you know, it was very opportunistic and serendipitous because I was not looking for a job. You know, I was not dressed and pressed because I was in like shorts and a t-shirt where everyone else was in suits. And just that conversation, you know, that really rings a bell because I felt like he really gave me that opportunity that I did not deserve. And I really didn't felt like, I really don't know what he saw in that just interchange because it wasn't an interview. He wasn't asking me for questions. So in that sense, I think that was kind of one of those moments or anchor points where I think, man, like, you know, one of those undeserving moments in my life where somebody gave me an opportunity that I didn't deserve, and it ended up being probably the best first job out of college that any kid could have. So
I think that's amazing and really interesting in the same sense that you obviously gave him an impression of who you were as a person. Mm-hmm. Even though nothing matched, you're not in a suit, you're in basketball gym clothes, but you're coming into a business fair, career day type scenario, but you were you, mm-hmm. and you just had a conversation with him that obviously gave him a certain sense and feeling about you as a person and that you would be a good fit within their organization. And then when the resume lines up, okay, this, like, now I'm really interested. Like, did you get that kind of sense or?
I think at that time I didn't really think much about it because I was just like, man, sweet. I got a job in Dallas where at that time my girlfriend, now wife, was. So, I had 2 offers, one for a company, Samsung in Austin, one for some medical company in Kansas. And I was always trying to find my way into Dallas to be with my girlfriend, but I just couldn't, right? I exhausted all my efforts in fall. And so, come spring, I was just like completely like disheartened. I was like, okay, it's just not going to happen. right? So the point when I finally gave up, something in the most unexpected time shows up. And when I finally got that job, I was just like, man, I'll just take anything, right? And, you know, I don't think I really had the maturity to really dissect that moment. I think it's just one of those moments in your life that takes hindsight for you to really say, man, you know, like, even though it's like years later, that you're like, man, I'm just so thankful for those moments that despite how much effort you put trying to make something work, it was not really because of your output, but it was really because of an opportunistic meeting and, you know, somebody else's, I guess, willingness to take a chance on me. Because, like, obviously, he didn't even have my resume at that point in time. And he came and found me in this crowd of kids in this career fair, tapped my shoulder and said, hey, man, here's my card, right? So, I don't know, all right? I mean, I think maybe he saw something in me.
I feel like that's influenced you more than you're giving it credit for. And just the little bit that I know you, I feel like that maybe had even a deeper impact, because maybe you can talk about how that experience has affected you to when you are hiring somebody or building a relationship, because I completely see that in you from like how you have taken your mission as chair at the IRO committee, which we'll get into way more later, and how you want to grow it, because you didn't keep it traditional in the sense of like, all right, this is all independent rental owners. We're going to just sit here and roll with this, and I'm going to find the best content I can find for them. You immediately went out and said, I want to add other parts of all things that go into the owner process, and I want representatives. I want a contractor here. I want an insurance agent. I want a broker. I want all these different pieces here so that people really get the full picture. So in a way, I feel like that kind of led you down that path to a degree, maybe not in every part of your business or your career, but like, I feel like, I mean, like, I certainly feel like you had that approach to me. Like, here comes a guy saying, I don't own any properties. I would like to. I really want to learn the other side of this. I've been on the GC side for 17 years, and I want to learn about this. And I met this guy at this other apartment association event, Jeremy, and he said I should talk to you and this committee and see what this is about. And everybody keeps talking about this lifestyles thing, and I don't even know what that is. Like, are we just using the word lifestyle? Like, I mean, I don't know. And I'm like,
lifestyles.
Yeah. I'm like, what are we talking about here? And you totally had that approach from the very first meeting that I ever met you.
Man, I feel like you're psychoanalyzing me. No, that's funny, because I never really thought it that way. You know, I maybe it was that encounter, but I think, you know, you struck something, because I think I tend to have that approach to really give second chances, or really look for opportunity where in areas that typically people might overlook, right? It's funny because in the non-traditional approach, like you mentioned, like what I'm trying to do with the IRO committee at the association, you know, I have this one thought was, I was having lunch at this Mexican restaurant in Arlington when I was managing an apartment that I purchased. And, you know, I was like jeans, dirty, you know, covered in paint, maybe like just looked scruffed up. And I was having lunch just in between like maybe renovations or managing renovations. And the waiter who was serving us was very prompt, and you know, he overheard our conversation, and probably a high school kid, right? And he was like, you know, hey, you know, if you don't mind me asking, what do you guys do? And I started explaining that, and had absolutely no experience at all. But after a while, I was like, hey, you know, do you have any interest in learning, right? And then it ended up turning to be, I actually hired him to help with renovations of the property. And I think my intention, or at least my approach with a lot of things is, I felt like I've been blessed in many different ways that I feel undeserving, that I just want to be able to share that knowledge that, hey, like Garrett, if you want to learn about real estate, I'm more than willing to help you at least to get to where I'm at, because I felt like there's a lot of people in my life that took chances on me, just like, my first manager in college that took their time to kind of pour in me, that I feel like I need to be able to help other people, right? So, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm starting to like, maybe it was that moment. I don't know. I think it's something I have to digest more.
That's awesome.
At home. So, yeah.
What's up, Kenny? Good to see you, my man. Appreciate you tuning in. Hello, Sarah. What's up, Colin? Did you see your boy just a minute ago? See, this is when you go to real guy places. This is what they give you, not ranch waters. Anyways, that's a unique perspective, I think, and it is a little rare to see today, where you're not just judging a book by the cover, you're going off of your true interactions and conversations, and being able to kind of sift through that. I think that's kind of a thing that we lack a lot of times, and it's really easy to get caught up the other way. So since we started down this path now, I'm going to jump probably a little bit ahead here, but maybe talk to us a little bit about the transition, because you did Cisco and Verizon, and you did a couple of these tech things, and then now you just do real estate. So take us down that little path of how that came about.
So I graduated from college, had my first job at Cisco, and I think 3 years in, pretty much everyone in my group, their job, like everyone was gunning for this certification, right? So this certification was technically like the highest level certification in the industry at that time for us technology professions. And in 2009, I worked my butt. It was probably one of the hardest things I've done. I passed the test, right? So this test involved two parts: a written test where you have to study and take it, and then also it takes 8 hours to study. 8 hours to test, where they give you a mock customer environment with maybe some problems or customer requirements, and you really have to program their entire environment in 8 hours. And they grade it afterwards. And the pass fail is the average is like, hey, you take this test. On average, people take this test maybe 5 times, right, before they pass, and they study, in the industry, maybe like 10 years of experience. Because of the unique position I was in within Cisco, I was exposed to so many issues that my 1 year experience was probably equivalent to like 3 to 5 years outside in the industry, that it really expedited my learning process and exposure to the technology, that after 3 years, I took the test and passed on my first try. So I was shocked, because I honestly thought I failed. And after I took the test, I kind of like just felt deflated, because I thought I failed. So when I found out that I passed my first time, I was like, wow, right? But then after I passed, which was technically like I felt was the pinnacle of my technical career in that position, either I kind of go to management or switch to a completely different technical domain, I started getting complacent in my job, right? So, job satisfaction, I didn't feel challenged. I wasn't really learning as much. And I had this thought that, because I was in this technical profession, if I had to, I literally, like, technology changes like every week, that I had to read a lot of material, that I was supporting technology that I didn't even know myself, and I had to become an expert on it overnight. So that I was like, hey, what if I learn how to speed read, right? If I, if I could consume information in a short amount of time, I could be more effective in my job and do it in less amount of time. So I bought a speed reading book, and, in order to speed read, you have to actually have material to practice on. So I picked two subjects that I had absolutely no experience on. One was stocks, one was real estate, right? So I had these, Stocks for Dummy and this real estate book next to me. And obviously I started, all the techniques of like sub-vocalization, pacing, your eye movement and stuff like that on this stock book. But the problem with stock is that there's a lot of formulas, and you had to go reference like people's financial statements and stuff. So it was really difficult to really establish cadence and really drill in and practice those techniques that they're teaching in speed reading. So I was like, okay, this is not working, right? So I threw that away, or chucked it aside, and then I picked up my real estate book. Honestly, I knew nothing about real estate. I didn't even know what a mortgage was, right? I'm a kid out of college, 3 years, probably fourth year. So this was maybe 2000. So I graduated to 6, so probably around 2009, 2010, right? So started reading this real estate. Good, it was a lot of storytelling about guys' experience, reading strategies and stuff. Maybe halfway through the book, I was like, you know what, man, this stuff actually is interesting, right? It actually makes sense, right? Like this talk about passive income, on how you can grow your net worth, to a point where I didn't finish the speed reading book. That actually turned me on to real estate from this book, that I was like, man, there's something here that I need to scratch. So after being exposed to this book, I started just researching as much as I can about real estate, because of my speed reading effort, which I didn't even complete. And
was this like a 4-hour work week thing? You're going down and learning the speed read and all that?
Well, I was trying to make my life more efficient, right? To speed read, right? Okay. But the material that I was using was real estate, and I actually got more excited about the material of real estate than speed reading at that point, that I stopped speed reading and just started my efforts in reading about real estate. So, I started Googling and say, hey, real estate, investing, whatever on Google. And I came upon a group called Lifestyles Unlimited online. I was like, what is this, right? Lifestyles Unlimited sounds so phony, right? They had a 2-day workshop or 2-day seminar that I attended, and my wife thought was crazy. My friends and coworkers like, oh, okay, whatever, right? Attended, and at first, man, like it just seems so shady, right? You're in this back room with maybe like 7-8 other people, right? And they're selling you. I was like, man, this sounds too good to be true, right? And I'm just like this impressionable, college grad that has maybe 3-4 years of work experience. I'm like, this sounds, like after the 2 years, my brain was just like, whoa, there's this whole other world outside of tech that, you can make money, right? And, this idea of passive income and, growing your wealth and a legacy. I'm like, oh man, right? So at first I was just also very skeptical, right? So they also had like a bunch of business cards of the vendor. So what I did was I took all the cards I could find in the vendor, at the back table. I went home and I started Googling and say, is this, typing in the website, seeing if they're legitimate, because I thought maybe they're all colluding, right? So after that, I was like, man, maybe it is real, because all the websites post up. I called the vendors and they're picking up their phones. This can't be one elaborate big scheme. So long story short, this 2-day seminar was enough for me to just like blow up my mind of how much I did not know, that I was like, man, I need to learn more about real estate, right? I knew absolutely nothing about it, right? I didn't know anything about deeds, surveys, mortgages, the mechanics of it. It just was like, man, there's just so much information here, but I think there's something here that I need to know more about. And instead of kind of piecemealing this information through like, Bigger Pockets and all these other online resources, I was trying to think about what's a structured way to kind of learn this as if I didn't know anything. And that's when I came about getting my real estate license, because they offer structured information from A to Z that if you take these courses, you should be licensed. So that was more, it made sense for me to kind of pursue that avenue. So, I spent 6 weeks, I was working a 9 to 5 at that time, Monday, Wednesday. So I pretty much spent Saturday, Sunday doing real estate classes. And after 6 weeks or 7 weeks, I got my license. And from there, I pretty much kind of took some of the principles that Lifestyles had as it relates to single family and just started buying rental properties. But that was really kind of how I got introduced in real estate, where my career started in tech. It kind of veered to real estate. And it's funny because, like, you know, I didn't go out searching for real estate. You know, I didn't go out searching for my job at Cisco. Somebody kind of gave that to me, right? At the same time, I wasn't really looking for real estate. It kind of happened by the chance of me trying to learn how to speed read or learn the skill of speed reading. That just so happened that I picked up a book about real estate and it made sense. And then I just kind of went this avenue, right? So that's really how the start of my real estate passion started in, I think it was 2009 or 10. So, and you know, so when we're talking about real estate, you know, it's something, you know, because I became licensed, it was something I was able to do alongside my full-time job. So at the time, you know, I wasn't married, but at the same time I had, you know, see my girlfriend, no kids. So at that time I felt like I have unlimited time. So I would actually work from, you know, whatever the hours are, 9 to 5. And then from 5 to whatever, I'd be looking at properties. On the weekends, I would be looking for properties. I probably looked at 43 houses before I bought my first property. So these are properties not like in my backyard. They're like all across town. So at the time, my work was in Richardson. I lived in Plano. And these are properties like in Irving, Grapevine, Cedar Hill, Grand Prairie, right? So like I'd bust my butt across town, traffic hour, just to go see a property, make my butt back in time, you know, to hit the sack and then wake up for work, to the point where I had to figure out how to make my time more efficient, where there's times like I even went during my lunch hour to go look for properties. And I remember clearly that there was a house in Richardson, and this was like when the foreclosure crisis was happening, or subprime was happening, that, you know, typically I'd go with my Cisco buds to go grab lunch. I was like, hey man, you know, I want to look at this property. You want to tag along? They're like, what? Right? So get in the car, pull up to this house, you know, had my Supra go in. And I was like, hey, you want to come in? They look at the house. All of them's like, are you kidding? I'm staying in here, because you see this house, you know, maybe a 3-2 single story, busted windows, graffiti, you know, boarded up doors. They're like, what the hell are you doing? No, right? So I go in, you know, I'm kind of like, man, is there someone living here or not, right? And all my coworkers on the car, like, they're like, what the hell, man? Let's go, man. What are you doing? You know, we only have like 20 minutes. We haven't bought lunch, and why the hell? We're
gonna keep your car from getting stolen, man.
You know, they're like freaking out, and I'm like, you know, for me, I'm like, I see opportunity here, right? And the irony is that, you know, I just kept grinding it out and buying properties. And, you know, meanwhile, you know, some of my coworkers at that time were like, heck no, man, like, you're crazy, right? And turn full circle, some of those same coworkers at that time within the car, because of some circumstance at work, whether they got, you know, riffed or find a new job, or job satisfaction was not there, they finally came around and says, hey man, you know, like, this property thing, man, can you like tell me what's going on? And you know, I'm like, finally, man, you know, like, and I tell them, I was like, man, if you had started when we started, you wouldn't even need your job right now. And they're like, man, I know. But, you know, I'm just happy that some of my coworkers now at that point in time finally kind of came full circle, where they're kind of starting that parallel track of working full-time and doing something on the side. And I'm hoping maybe one day that what they're building on their side will actually be, you know, their plan B will actually be their plan A, where they won't even need their full-time job anymore. So
that's cool. So were you, when you started that out, were you more like flipping houses?
No.
Or were you just creating rental portfolio?
So this was something that, you know, I kind of learned or decided early on that when you flip or wholesale houses, it's just another job, right? It's an active form of income, right? I quickly make the equity and move on, right? Yeah, I might get a nice big paycheck, but it's an active form of earning income, right? I was not into that because I had a full-time job. I was not interested in making the quick 20K and buying another house and doing that. I was more about passive income because my mindset was I need to figure out ways to be able to decouple my earning potential from my work effort, right? Earlier on, I was like, I know that maybe a $100 cash flow on an asset per month might not sound long compared to if I were to sold it and make a quick 20K. But the difference is that it's passive, okay, to some extent. And I believed earlier on that the key to earning potential is to be able to realize that how can you find ways to decouple your earning potential or your earnings from your time, right? So if I was flipping, good, I make 20K, but that's it. I'm not getting any more income, right? I got to go flip another house, and I was not into that, right? Unless if I was planning to quit my job, and I was like, man, I'm not going to quit my job. I was already making pretty good money at Cisco, that I'm just trading one, job for another. I'm looking for opportunities to generate passive income so that eventually this $100 a month ends up being 200, ends up being 400, ends up 2,000, being 3,000. That's not tied to my time. So that would actually give me the freedom to say, you know what? I don't like my job. I'm going to leave and I'll be okay, right? So that was my mindset going in earlier on. And I think that's kind of like the temptation of short-term benefits and long-term gain, right? 20K now sounds very attractive. Don't get me wrong, right? Like you can do a lot with 20K. But I was okay with $100, $200, whatever cash flow because it was not tied to my time. So I was really trying to find ways to separate that correlation between my earning potential from my time. And I saw at that time it was is rentals, right? So I just bought one rental, made a little bit cash flow, bought another rental, bought another. And, at that point, the funny thing is that it actually gave more purpose to my job at Cisco in a corporate world or W2, because suddenly what I felt like I, kind of plateaued in my job. And I was like, man, I don't like this politics going on. I don't like, maybe I was getting looked over or, all the baggage that comes with working in a W-2 job started to become amplified. Actually be like, you know what? This job actually has a purpose to fund my real estate endeavors, because banks like W-2 income, right? They use that to underwrite and says, hey, we just need, 1 month's worth of paycheck and that's it. And I was like, oh, okay, that means I can get how many more loans, right? And I'm thinking how many more? And then at the same time, when my wife had a W-2 job, I was like, oh, so I put the houses in my name, and then if we get married, I'll put more houses in her name. I'll qualify for good rates, right? It helped expedite and give us purpose into why we were working, despite how bad things were going. Because my end goal was not like, hey, I'm going to climb this corporate ladder and become as high as I can. I was like, you know what? I'm actually happy with my individual contributor job. If you want to promote me, that's fine. But if you want me to promote me to be manager of other people, right? Because then I started to make that decision of like, are the decisions and responsibilities of my corporate job interfering with my secondary goals of building this passive income capital engine, right? And there's times where when I was working at Cisco, it was interfering with it, right? Because I switched jobs and the responsibilities and requirements were becoming too demanding to a point where they wanted us to come back into the office. I was remote probably maybe quite some time, right? And I felt like it was actually infringing on my ability to look for more properties. And that's when I said, you know what, maybe this job isn't for me, right? I'm not looking to climb this corporate ladder, right? My job is really to build something that is sustainable, that's not dependent on somebody else to give me a paycheck, but is more about creating something that is self-sustainable that I control. And when I had that mindset, I was like, yeah, this job's not for me, right? So that's when I decided to apply and leave Cisco, which was tougher because that was my first job. And I left Cisco to join Verizon Enterprise Solutions, and that's when I had a different job, which I actually really enjoyed that job. But at the same time, it was very synergistic because it allowed me to also kind of pursue my side gig of creating this portfolio.
So in this process, in this time frame, did you just continue to self-teach, self-learn this whole real estate game in this aspect, or did you grow within the lifestyle community that you joined, or did you find a mentor? How did you start leveling up just in this aspect and going from, I got these 1 or 2 rental properties to a whole portfolio?
So I have to say that lifestyle was very pivotal and really opened up my mindset because as somebody that does not have any exposure to real estate, they have really kind of put a roadmap and saying, hey, look, these are the type of houses, these are the types of things that to look out for, that they really cut the learning experience down in half, or at least dampen that learning curve. But I think from there, I was an avid learner because of my technical job, that I had to learn things overnight to be expert on, to support enterprise customers on, that I kind of took that skill set into real estate, that all I did was just read, right? Real about real estate, real about, stuff on Bigger Pockets. If I had a question, right, just kind of dive deeper. So a lot of learning was online. And if I didn't understand things, I'd probably go to certain meetings. But I think the one thing that I think is most valuable, especially for anybody starting out, is really kind of find a community to plug yourself in. Whether it be lifestyles, whether it be the association, whether it be whatever, right? If you have interest in real estate, there's going to be ups and downs. And, you were saying that you kind of like the average of the 5 people you're around, your vernacular starts to change, right? And I think that's one of the benefits of real estate, is that you get to meet people. You mean
you can speak fluently in acronyms at a certain point? Because y'all kill me with that at the IRL meetings.
Like for example, like the talk when I was just in tech was all about tech.
Yeah.
Right. We talked the same, we complained the same, and it was just all about tech, right? And when you start talking about real estate, like at first you're like hearing people talk, oh yeah, I just bought 5 properties, right? And you're like, what, right? And I think the biggest thing where I'm thinking back is, at first it might seem so far reaching, like, man, that guy has like, apartment complex, 300 units. Oh, that guy has 3 apartments, man. Like I can never be like that, right? Or I can never own that apartment down the street. I think that the value of getting plugged into some community, whether it be an investment group or friends or family that's doing it, is that the reality of owning something of whatever you want to do becomes more of a reality. That like when you're like, wait, that person just bought an apartment and they were a teacher, it kind of opens your minds of what's possible. Because I think, I don't know if you're a big Tony Robbins guy, but like 80% is mindset and 20 is mechanics. Right? Yeah. And a lot of it is self-talk and self-doubt. That if you can't overcome that, you're not going to make the first step. And if you make the first step, if you still have that negativity, you're not going to push through it. There's so much crap that I've gone through that sometimes just going to a real estate meetup kind of says, you know what, that's not that bad, right? Or, hearing other people's story of like, man, that's crap that I've been through, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's actually normal, right? So, I think, if I were just kind of like explain to anybody who wants to get involved in real estate, you can't do this alone. If anything, you really need to be around people, because the vernacular starts to change where it's like, oh man, I hate my, W-2 job, I can't wait up to Monday, like it starts to change from that to like, oh yeah, I just looked at this 300 unit property. Yeah, it didn't, they're asking too much because XYZ, or maybe, this 150 unit is a good play because maybe we could do water conservation, or maybe we can increase the income.
ROI is not there.
Yeah, exactly. And like you start speaking to like that lingo, that it starts becoming within the realm of possibility for you.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that real estate, whether it be single family, multifamily, or any other asset class, is in the realm of everybody who wants it, right? I think most of the people, when I say,
you can
hey,
find
man,
a starting point.
you can find a starting point. Anybody can do it. I mean, there's a lot of like coworkers, friends, like, oh man, I can't do it, right? And it's because their existing pain is not great enough for them to explore it. It's only until they get laid off, or they get, one of my best friend and best man at my wedding, and it was only until he got relocated to Corpus Christi from Dallas that he was like, dude, it's torture here, man. This is like the armpit of Texas, right? And I was like, man, like you ruined with me when I was getting my license, right? He even went through it, but like his drive and his why was not there.
Yeah.
And he kept thinking about like the negativity, evictions, this and that. But I was like, now
with the renters.
Exactly, right? But like, I truly believe that real estate is, at least from an ownership perspective, is available for everybody. You have to overcome that 80% of mindset that you have yourself, because the mechanics that people think is actually the 80% is only 20%. And the mindset is 80%. So you really have to overcome that 80%, which, really comes by just surrounding yourself with people that are done it, or maybe within like 1 to 2 degrees of separation of yourself, to kind of flush out, say, hey man, why aren't you doing it? And then kind of talk you out of your self-talk, right? To push you over the ledge. Because, I've met like, there's this really good friend that I actually ask for help, right? Terry, she's on the IRA committee.
Yeah.
She's been doing this for 30 years. She has knowledge out on how to handle everything.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I had a question, I would ask her. She'd be like, spit it out. I'm like, what? Right? And to think that like in the 30 years, she probably only started investing in maybe the last 5. I was like, how are you not investing like year 2 of your career? Right? Like simple things like, like how to deal with residence eviction process. I'm having to read out of the Red Book in TAA how to deal with it. And she knows that since she was probably a teenager.
Yeah.
Right. So I believe there's so many people in the industry of multifamily that are doing this as a job that know so much more than a lot of owners out there, that they have the unfair advantage of being in the industry, that if they just change their mindset and say, hey, this, this does not just have to be a job that pays 9 to 5 and pays a paycheck for me. I could actually change my mindset and say, hey, I could actually own this apartment that I'm managing as a leasing agent one day, right? It's possible, because
it's so true, because I know when I had my first conversation with Jeremy, it was kind of, once we kind of did small talk and what do you do? What are you part of? Kind of went through that whole thing.
Right.
I was like, yeah, my wife's a realtor. I've been a GC for 17 years. Like, I want to start building a portfolio. Like I want to learn this. I was like, it started out like back in the day, I used to always say like, I'd go help with DDs, due diligences, for those that don't know what that is. I don't want to turn into the acronym guy now, but it's where we as contractors get called out to help owners and management assess a deal that they're looking at. And I would hear all these terms, like, and half of them I just let go in one ear and out the other. Yeah. Now sitting in the IRO meetings, I'm sitting here going like, oh, that's what that is. That's why they were concerned about this. And I used to always say, like, I would love to be a fly on the wall when I've made this great estimate, I've put this whole presentation together, and the owner shits on it, like, within minutes. And it's like, well, either like my direction wasn't good from the management or the ownership, like, and I would just love to be a fly on those walls. But like, now that I'm starting to see it, it's not always that. And it's not what you think on the contractor side, because when you start really trying to see like what that owner or that group is trying to do, what they value and what they're looking for, you start being able to look at it. Because like, you know, after sitting here with you now, I'd be like, even though you and I have never done a deal together, we've never worked on a deal, looked at a deal or anything like that together, knowingly, that I know of or that you know of, I don't think. But it's like, okay, like maybe I'm not using the right vocabulary with you, that maybe your expertise is on the financing of the whole deal and where you got to get it and everything else. And that if I'm using my same construction lingo, you might not be as well versed in that. And you're just like, oh, that's fluff. I don't need that. But because like I didn't understand what your needs were enough, because I don't understand your side of the game as much, which I'm actually learning now in this capacity of being on the committee and hearing these owners talk and people doing these things. And I'm like, wow, this is a whole nother side of this ball game that I know about, don't really know about. And because I came in there with the intentions of learning about something else, just wanting to learn their game, I'm now connecting all these other dots. And it's really fascinating, because it's like, okay, like maybe I need to this, because like, I'm always just like, well, why don't they want to spend this money? They can spend $10,000 right now. I know it wasn't planned. They can take care of this. And if they don't, or they Band-Aid this, it's then within 6 months to a year going to cost them $30,000. Why would you not spend $10,000? You're a money guy. You got your little spreadsheets. You keep throwing all these numbers at me. Why would you not do this to save 20 grand?
Right.
You know, it's like those things you don't think of.
So to comment on that, you have an unfair advantage of knowing the construction side, right? So CapEx budget can make or break your performa.
Yeah.
Right? Like I might project like, oh yeah, it's $1 million to do this or that. You might be like, no, that's 1.5. Or you might be like, no, that's 800. The especially in a value deal, which is a whole different aspect, is you have that unfair advantage where you have the contacts and you have the experience. As an owner, if I don't have that experience, I have to figure that out. So I'm either getting multiple bids, I'm, trying to, figure out this to really narrow down, or I'm buffering extra capital, right? And if my estimation is either over or under, it affects my performance. So the preciseness of your estimation, which you have an unfair advantage, gives you that edge.
Yeah.
Right. And, for you, it might be construction. For the next person, it might be that experience in operation. For the next person, it might be like, hey, I know how to operate this because I've grew up on this apartment complex and I know the ins and outs of operation, that I know that this property actually requires, 2 people on the inside, 3 people on the outside, whatever it is, versus whatever you're performing. Those are all assumptions that factor into your performance, right? And I think that's usually one thing that's kind of overlooked, that, as an owner, for somebody that comes from tech that doesn't have any real estate background, any construction background, you might have like 10, 20 years of experience. I have 0 experience, and I have to learn that in maybe, whatever time.
A 30-day window.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So, that's one encouragement I have to people who are contemplating ownership, is that everybody has a particular skill set that will make them an owner, right? It might not even be real estate experience. Some people might have business management experience, or even employee management, right? As you grow your portfolio, you're going to have employees. And just because you're an individual contributor doesn't mean you're a good manager or leader. And to be able to grow your enterprise to be something bigger than just a one-person shop, you're going to have to learn how to manage your books and delegate, and have that separation of, hey, I'm going to do everything, versus, hey, I'm going to choose what to delegate. That is also a skill, right? So for me, my skill set was on the technical underwriting side, right? Like being able to look at data, and I had to learn everything else. And I think a lot of people discount themselves from being an owner, when really it's like, hey, you actually have a lot of skill sets that will actually play well in real estate.
You're like the exact opposite of me. Like the stuff that you're good at, like scares the shit out of me. You start doing these like spreadsheets and talking about all these numbers and how it gets to here and growing this and where these lines cross on all these graphs and stuff. And I'm just sitting here going, oh.
Well, to be honest, I don't think you really need to go to that level.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe sometimes I might get lost in the data. It's funny because, for me to be familiar with a multifamily scene, like it's not like single family. You have MLS where all the data is public, right? Multifamily is a bit more harder to get that data, and it's hard for somebody to, you know, going in and says, okay, you know, I'm buying this apartment, right? Like, what do I do, right? Is this a majority of a 2-bedroom asset? Is this asset majority of 2 bedrooms? Well, does it fit in a sub-market that pays a premium for 2 bedrooms, or is it more efficiencies, right?
Yeah.
So there's many different things that you have to look at that I spent way too much time looking at, to a point where, you know, my wife kind of tapped me on the shoulder, was like, okay, this data is nice, so when are you going to buy an apartment? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot, right? Because I got so involved in the data of things that I actually enjoyed the process of underwriting, creating spreadsheets, looking at data, market analysis, that I actually enjoyed that process more so than actually talking to people. And the funny thing is that, you know, I built this program to map all the assets in DFW, all the apartments, spatially, right, on a map. And I was like, man, if you click this filter, it'll show you all this, and you can show this graph. And the really telling thing is that this broker goes, that's nice. So when are you going to buy something? I'm like, oh, that's right. The end goal is to buy a property, not this data stuff. And
you're not working for RealPage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he brought some realism to it, and I always appreciate his feedback, because he's a very counterbalance to my rabbit hole analysis to data. And the funny thing is that what I did in data, he could probably just pick up a phone, make one call, and says, do you want the deal for this? And I'm like, that's it? That easy? And I just spent like 5 months building this program. So yeah, no, that was kind of funny.
Well, I think that's a good transition point too. So it's gonna be like 2-part question here. Mm-hmm. Do you think people need to start in single family and get some grassroots there before jumping to multifamily? Or do you think people can go into multifamily? And then can you kind of, after you answer that, can you kind of transition to like how you transitioned from single family to multifamily?
Okay. So I get that question a lot, and I hear people ask that a lot who start in real estate. And it really depends on their circumstance and their personality. I think the one thing that may be overlooked is a lot of people give advice, and I've wrongly given advice and says, go here, go there. But the one thing that I've really failed to really talk about is it really depends on your personality. I think you really have to look at your personality in terms of your risk tolerance and your comfort zone. Because when I first started, there's a good friend that I know that we probably started around the same time. Because of where he was financially and his risk tolerance and experience in other fields of business, it was a no-brainer for him to jump straight to multifamily and skip single family. For me, as a 4-year out of college hotshot, multifamilies talking the millions was just like mind-blowing, right? At the same time, I'm very systematic with not taking leaps of risk, more like progressive risks, where jumping to multifamily was too much of a risk for me to take, that I had to kind of take an intermediate step to go to single family. So for one, it just seemed too much of a leap for me. So I started with single family, kind of got the experience. And then I think also from there, once I reached a point of scalability, or I wasn't able to scale after a certain point, that's when I realized I had to go to multifamily, right? But my friend who started, he's like, man, it makes sense for me to go straight to multifamily, right? So I think it really depends on the person and their capital stack, because if someone has, for one, risk tolerance, can they go straight to multifamily and lead a deal, right? There's a lot of people that can, right? It also depends on where you are in your life stage. I was, didn't have kids, girlfriend, and I had unlimited time. So I felt like I could run the streets and find many different properties. It wasn't until I got married and started having kids, I was like, man, I can't do this, right? I can't go find another 10 properties to buy without possibly getting a divorce, right? So it wasn't until I actually started having a family where I was like, man, I cannot do single family because of the amount of time it takes for me to find 1 property, 2 property, 3 property, 4 property. If I had to find 10 more properties, I'd probably, pull my hair out if I had hair at that time. So I think it's really, it's hard to say. It really depends on the person, on their personality. Some people in that life stage that do have, that don't have the time, it might be too much of a leap to go to multifamily, right? So single family might be good to kind of get their feet wet, right? Like I have a coworker, one of the coworkers I told you, he reached out to me maybe 3-4 weeks ago, saying he wants to do both, but doesn't know when, doesn't know what. And he's probably one of the smartest guys I know. He's much smarter than I am. He's probably someone that I would ask help in a technical field if I went into a problem. And I know that he can chop up a deal like no other. But I know that he's like me, people in corporate that likes 100% certainty before they move. And I told him, I was like, dude, you're asking me all these questions about like, hey, what's cap rate? What metrics do I look at? This and that. And I just said, look, his name is Gilles. I was like, your problem is not education, right? Because I know you're really smart. You're smarter than me. Your problem is making a move, right? So my advice is don't worry about the education because I know you can learn it overnight. Your problem is just go do something. Go buy a property. Go buy a single family. Just do anything. And I'm pretty sure that once you buy that asset, whatever it is, you're going to learn and be an expert overnight, right? So for him, it's more like he's too careful and he needs to just do something. And then there's some people who are too careless that do something, but not enough education, right? So, it's hard to really prescribe a one size fits all. It really depends on your personality, your life stage. I could tell you that there's many different ways. The beauty about real estate is that there's many different ways to get involved, right? You can buy single family, rent it. You can buy single family, flip it, depending on your time if you have it. You could be a passive investor if you don't want any managerial responsibility or active responsibility and just be an equity partner multifamily. Or if you want to be able to transition and maybe make multifamily as a sponsor to lead the deal, your full-time job, right? There's so many different ways. And this is just the asset class of single family and multifamily that it's hard to really prescribe a mechanical way and saying like, this is the way that you do it. I think really you have to kind of know what you want of it, what your constraints are, what's your personality, and kind of find the right approach in terms of real estate on how to kind of get involved. And I think most people, it's like they're more afraid to get involved. And I think that's where like you have to kind of surround yourself with people who are already doing it or people so that you can overcome that 80% mindset of self-negativity and self-talk, get over that, and then kind of figure out, okay, how do I actually get involved? But, I think it really goes back to what's your why? Why do you even want to do this?
Yeah.
Right? Because like my best friend, his why was not strong enough when I got involved. He's like, man, I'll just work my 9 to 5. It pays me good money, right? Until he got relocated to Corpus Christi. He's like, okay,
my why just changed.
Right? My why is my change, right? So I think, my everyone I talk to is like, don't wait for your personal circumstance to dictate and says, okay, now I'm going to work on it. Work on it now so that when something happens in your personal circumstance or personal job, whatever, that you can be like, yeah, I'm not moving into a Corpus Christi. Here's my 2 weeks, or just take the package, right? I was just fortunate or naive enough to kind of work those in tandem when I did, because it was probably the best time, maybe 2010, 11, when, the sky was falling to buy properties left and right, that it worked out.
So do you and your wife have the same risk tolerance? And
No.
have you always?
Oh, man.
Or
No.
how does that balance work?
So I actually have a story to tell. So we got married. I probably bought maybe 3 houses before we got married, and I was tapped in capital, right? So we got married, and you know, we went to a pastor. We talked about premarital counseling, about joint finances, and expectations of outlaying, you know, who's going to do what to avoid all this and that. And I just remember that when they talked joint finances, I was like, oh, great, man. That means I could buy more properties, right? Like, I wonder how much she works, because my wife is a hard worker. She entered the workforce much sooner than I did, even though I'm older. I did the 5-year program. She did the 4-year. So she's a hard worker, right? I mean, you know, she really counterbalances my personality, where I just kind of spend. She's more like, hey, we got to put the brakes on some things, right? And fortunately, at that time, when we got married, she was in a job where she traveled a lot, right? Like Europe, you know, Germany and stuff like that. And she'd be gone maybe a week. And thinking back, that actually gave me the opportunity to go in the evenings to look for properties, because I didn't have to be at home, right? So we were married, and this was my first lesson of what it means to communicate in a marriage. But when we had joint accounts and joint finances, I took that literally. Okay, so we combined accounts. She had her account, I had an account, we're joint, and she had her savings, I had my savings, both in her name. And when I was tapped out, I was like, oh, okay, here's another slush fund I can use to buy property. Meanwhile, she's in, I don't know, Austria, right? Different time zone. So I start transferring money over to my account, and I start buying properties, right? Like writing these cashier checks and stuff like that. And, you know, being an engineer, I was like, you know, it's kind of inefficient that we have these 2 accounts. You know, I transferred money over, and I was like, oh, why not just zero it over? It doesn't make sense to have, like, you know, like an even number in her account. Let me just zero it over, bring it over to my account, and start cutting these checks to buy properties. And I just remember, you know, she's in a different time zone. Like one time she calls me in the middle of the night, and I'm like, who's calling me, right? And I'm pick up, and she's like, what? We got hacked, and this, that. And because I zeroed her accounts to zero, right? Because I was in the impression of like,
Babe, I hope you're listening to this.
I was in the impression of joint accounts, joint finances, right? And I didn't communicate any of this to her.
Yeah.
And she freaked out. She thought we got hacked. All her savings. Imagine like somebody out of college, maybe like 2-3 years, right? Her savings ever since she was an intern in college, she saved up. She did not spend it, right? One day she logs it, it's all gone to zero, right? 4 years.
How did you
5
not
years.
end up in divorce court?
So anyhow.
Yeah.
So anyhow, you know, middle of the night, I'm like, hello, and she's like, oh, I got hacked. I was like, oh no, you know, I just you know, took all your money, and you know, I'm just kind of
bought you this great property.
Like for, you know, typically you would like coherently try to massage the data in your head and speak it out in a very convincing manner, but I'm just kind of like half lucid, just saying whatever's my mind. Yeah, Dad, you know, like didn't think anything was a problem, and I just said, yeah, I just took your money, you know, zeroed out because you know it didn't make sense to have 2 accounts, and bought some property, and she was not happy, right? So that was my first lesson of communication in a marriage, that I can't make these types of financial decisions without her consent. But I think probably within the first 5 years of marriage of investing, it really left a bad taste, right? Rightly so, of real estate, because from that moment forward, I believe maybe it might have left a bad taste where she felt like, you know, this moment that I took all her money, spent it on something, robbed her of 4 years of hard work, and I just drained it to zero. And at the same time, it's like, why are you driving to Grand Prairie at 5 p.m. right after work when I'm at home by myself? And then all of a sudden you're going back to the property on Saturday, Sundays to manage rehabs. So like perception for her was like, it's robbing us from our relationship, right? And for me, I had this myopic view. I was like, hey, babe, I'm just working on for our financial future, this, and that. And I never really had the maturity to really think from her perspective.
And just share all that.
And share that. I just said, what you just don't understand. I'm doing this for us.
It was obvious to you.
Right? I was like, this is for us. That's it. Right? Like, and then for her, it's like, I don't care. Right? So I think that was a really big contention in our relationship early on. Fortunately, she did travel a lot, so I still continued and to buy property. But I think maybe around the 5-year mark of maybe buying single family, that's when I started selling stuff, right? So these, 100, 200, cumulative cash flow per month grew to, hey, I just got a check for 100,000, right? 200,000, whatever it is, right? And, all of a sudden our bank account kind of grew. She's like, oh, okay, now I start seeing, but like, that's where you kind of have, I think for somebody, right? Like I did it wrong, right? I didn't communicate.
Yeah, please tell me that deal did actually go good.
It did get good.
All right.
But I think if you have a partner, you both have to be on board. I would not recommend how I did it because, for one, I was really immature. I did not know how to communicate. And I just did things without really collaborating, right? And so like literally it left 5 years of difficulty, of strain that possibly did not really necessarily need to be there.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to, what's your why? Okay. So if you want to get involved in real estate, what's your why, right? Is it because you just want financial freedom? Is it just because everyone else is doing, like, what's your why? And is it strong enough to persevere those negative moments? Because there was a time when I started investing in real estate, and my mom is a realtor in Canada. So she's been around real estate. And when I showed her the first property, I was so excited. Like, hey, mom, this is my first property. Let me take you. I'm putting the rent sign and stuff like that. It was all negative. It was like, why are you doing this? It's so much risk, right? Like every road.
Your own mom.
My own mom, who is a realtor, right? Even my dad was just like, right? Like I did not seek the validation or encouragement from anybody. And I think it goes back to this internal compass that you have that, I think it speaks also to some level of leadership. I think that everybody has, that you have to be able to have this internal compass of what is right and what's wrong, or what's right for you in terms of, do I take door A, B, or C, despite everybody saying it's the wrong decision? Because I think at some level, if you make a decision because everybody agrees, and you're only going to make that decision because everybody agrees, you're not going to make the right decision. There's going to be decisions that you're going to have to make that everybody says it's the wrong decision, but you still have to push through. And I think that was one of the leadership decisions I've learned being a real estate owner, is there's many times where I had to make a decision that was counterintuitive to everybody, including my own wife, that, and my parents, that, at the end of the day, you start questioning yourself, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Everyone says no. Like, do I quit or not? And that's where it's like the why. Like, is it strong enough to persevere? And it's difficult because at the time, like, 2010, 11, I could say now, oh yeah, it was great. But in that moment, it was kind of scary, right? Like, there's foreclosures happening left and right. There's times where I bought property that was above market value because of foreclosure prices around, but I still pushed through. And there was times where I bought properties that the next day the HVAC got stolen, right? They literally cut it and took off.
Took your copper.
They took it, right? And I didn't have a cage on the condenser on the outside, and I was supposed to move in a tenant the next day. And, this was in like the hard part of South Oak Cliff, that when I rolled up, I was like, people sitting on the porches looking at me like, oh man, do I get out of my car or what? Like I was afraid.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of things that I've done that, at that moment, I really did not know if it was the right decision or not. And I think it really comes down to, like in corporate, right? If you have a W-2 job, you can make a mistake and fine, slap on the wrist, right? And there's this veil of safety net that you have, right? The worst that can happen was maybe you get reprimanded, but you have this safety net, right? But when you're out on your own, like in the apartment that I bought in 2019, 3 months before COVID hit, my wife and I signed a $2 million note that we personally guaranteed, meaning that if it was full recourse, meaning that if it went south, we are personally responsible for $2 million. On top of that, we raised about 1.3 of friends and family money. So maybe $3.3 million on our shoulders, right? That's a different level of responsibility on your shoulders versus working at a company where you don't have that responsibility. Worst thing, you get fired. So what, right? But taking that responsibility, you actually go in the negative, right? And I think the one biggest lesson I learned is that to learn how to make decisions in the face of failure and be clear-eyed of whatever happens, I'm going to own the responsibility. And I think that was one of the biggest leadership lessons I've learned is that typically in corporate, you can make decisions and not suffer the consequences. But when you're out there, buying real estate, signing a personal recourse note, and 3 months before COVID hit and shelter in place hits, you're like, okay, right? There's no one to tell me what to do. I don't know what this virus is. I don't know what the right decision is. The only thing that I can really gather in terms of making the right decision, the information experience I have. And most often, it's counterintuitive to what everyone else thinks, right? So make a decision. You don't have that luxury to not make a decision. You have to make a decision. So, in my head, there's two things. One, you make a decision, it's right. Second, you make a wrong decision, and are you willing to bear that responsibility? And I think for the longest time, I've never been in that position because I've been employed by a corporate company that whatever decision I make, there's always a safety net. In this opportunity, I had no safety net. So I had to mentally rehearse through my head and say, okay, if I make A, decision B, and what are the repercussions? And if I am okay with the repercussions, move forward, right? And I think that was probably one of the biggest leadership lessons I've learned is learning to listen to your internal compass or intuition of what to do, regardless of what people say, and not let voices kind of derail you from what you think the right thing to do. So
cool. You got my wife typing in all caps. I mean, she's like, "Don't even think about it. I'm listening." I'm like, "Oh man, that's all there." No, that's great advice, and that, man, I can't even. I'm not at a stage where I can fathom being personally responsible for $2 million just closing and COVID hitting. But you don't know if you can do any of the renovations you had planned, any of the marketing, any of the things that you had planned to increase occupancy, if you can evict anybody, if you can do any of the things that all went into the decision that you made to pull the trigger on that property.
So the funny thing is that we're talking in retrospect now.
Yeah.
But I did not know that COVID was going to hit. Right? Whatever decisions you're going to make, you don't know what lies behind that door. Right? And I think that's the thing, right? Like you cannot, there's no way that you'll be able to understand 100% certainty what the outcome is. Right? You have to make the best decision with the information in front of you and move forward.
Yeah.
The problem that I used to have was not making a decision because I think that's most people's problem. Right? Like analysis paralysis, right? You'd be paralyzed, but like, man, I need to know 100%, so I can't go this way, but then I can't go that way, so I'm not going to make a decision. But I think over time, and maybe maturity, I've kind of changed my paradigm, whereas, reframe what does failure mean? Right? Because when I talk about this internal compass of like, hey, do I go this way or that way, right? you have to make the best decision what's in front of you. And you have this gut feeling, I'm going to go this way, right? Whatever information you have. But how do you hone your decision making in the future, right? The way you hone your decision making in the future about your gut intuition is to be able to either make the right decision or the wrong decision. The worst thing that you can do is not make a decision and not really know or have that positive feedback of whether your intuition was right or wrong, right? So before I used to actually not make a decision and be like, I'm going to kick the can. Now, I'm kind of, maybe in the past year, I've kind of evolved my perspective in decision making. Is it's actually okay to make the wrong decision, because it's not a sign of failure, but it's more about feedback about whether you made the right, whether your gut intuition was right or wrong, right? So for example, if I was going to go say, hey, I'm going to go buy this property, and end up being completely wrong based on some information I have, and it ended up being a horrible information, well, at least now I have feedback, whether it be positive or negative, about whether my decision process was right or wrong, because then it would actually allow me to hone my knife in the future about decision making and leadership decisions. And I think that's kind of my thing that I'm really kind of going through, is being okay to make the wrong decisions and just kind of stepping in and not hesitating. But, I believe that everyone kind of has their own internal compass of where north is. And some people might have a GPS. Some people might just kind of have like the magnetic. But the only way to really hone your compass is really just make a decision, whether it's right or wrong, so that you can really obtain that feedback of whether whether it was whether you're on the right track or not, so that the next time you encounter an ambiguous situation, you can really, have that statistical decision making from previous events to kind of make a closer decision or not.
Was there any other things that you can look back on now in hindsight and say like, man, I thought this was like a huge roadblock, or this is going to prevent me from doing what I want to do, that actually once you broke through that or proved that thought or theory wrong was like a huge stepping stone for you?
So, typically if I have that foresight of those roadblocks, I don't step into it, right? I think it comes back to that analysis paralysis, like, oh, I see all those roadblocks. For me, I think I'm realizing that a lot of the things that have happened in my life has been coincidental. Just like how I even got that job at Cisco, how I got involved in real estate, how I even brought that property in Arlington. A lot of that stuff happened just because I just stepped into it. Okay. And, what a common theme that I've had personally is that once I stepped into mud, into chaos, that's when there's nobody else except me to kind of pull through. And it depends on what your level of grit is to pull through. Right.
There's that word grit again.
So not to really kind of like, oh, me, grit, right? It's more like, how much do you trust yourself to pull through on something?
Yeah.
Right. Do you believe in yourself? I think in most times when my back is against the wall, I feel like, man, this sucks. Right. But I've somehow been able to pull through, not all the time because of my own will, but because things somehow lined up in my favor outside of my control. Right?
Well, I think this aligns so much with life in general, and then just about anybody's career, profession, or the level of success they do or do not have. You can't just talk about it. You have to do it. You have to, you have to find what it is you want to move forward with and get off the sideline. Mm-hmm. You have to take action in some way or shape or form. And as long as, like you've said several times, your why and why you made that decision is big enough, then you're going to figure it out. Yeah, you may fall back several times, but eventually you'll start moving forward. Yeah. And you've got to be willing to take those lumps, make those losses, but then turn them into wins and learn those lessons. I mean, I think almost everything you've said at some point kind of revolves around that to some degree. And like you just said, it's like the grit. And even though, I think it's great too, because you've shared so much so openly about how you had all these self-doubts. You created computer programs to help you answer your questions because that's what you were strong at the time. And then when you got around that person or that opportunity, they're like, hey man, like, what are you going to do with it? Like, great, you have all this information. You've done it. Are you pulling the trigger or you're not? Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, man, cool. Let's get off the bus and we're going to pull the trigger. Let's go. And you've done this at like all these different stages. And I think that's a key thing. And I think it's good for people to see. And that's why we do this show. And that's why I like doing this in all the different formats, because it doesn't matter. And I think I love too that you said, I feel like there's a space in real estate for everyone. Like, what space in real estate is for you to determine. And there's 100 different choices. I mean, like, if you really try to tie everything back to real estate, I mean, there's products and services, there's contractors, there's insurance agents, there's management, there's ownership, there's investment portfolios, there's, funding of it, there's the loans, that industry is so huge. I mean, like, even though we're more multifamily, at least now, right. But even multifamily, it's a small world, but it's huge. Yep. And just kind of finding your lane and I love this because this is something that comes up, I feel like in IRO a lot as well, is what's your risk tolerance? Where are you at? Like, my answer is probably not the same for you. And I think you do a great job of teaching those things and showing people these things that, like, hey, just because I'm saying like my factor, I'm thinking back to one of the last meetings and you had your chart and we're going through it and you're like, my risk tolerance is here. Mm-hmm. It started out here. Now I'm kind of here and I'm trying to push to here. But like, does someone have a risk tolerance higher, lower? Why? And we have those healthy conversations. So I also think it's very important that, you guys do, like he said as well, like, find groups, find committees, find things you can be a part of. I mean, like, even within this industry as well, there's a lot of great associations and groups and committees. And, it's like there's AAGD, which is the Apartment Association of Greater Dallas. It's huge. Mm-hmm. And there's so much. I mean, I've been in this industry for 17 years, and until a year ago, I didn't even know what IRO was. I didn't even know that committee.
I didn't know either when I
mean, like, yeah, you get the welcoming committee. I know the events, and there's all these different ones, and I've been a part of like several of those in the past. But like, I'm learning like there's all these other things, and like, as in that community alone, or whether it's the Fort Worth Apartment Association or the Houston or Austin, or you just name it. Every city has, all the major cities have their own association. Then there's the state level, and then there's national level. So you can dive in and bite off as much or as little of this as you want to. And there's something, again, for everyone, and you can kind of jump those things. And then there's groups outside of that, like he was talking about earlier, about lifestyles. And I'm sure there's 10 different versions of that. And you can just start doing this. But the point of that is, like, find one and find some people that you can put yourself in that circle, in those conversations. And then when those chance opportunities happens or things start clicking, you can decide which path to go down. Yeah. And I think that's where I want to go with talking about IRO in a minute too, because I don't want to run us out of time to talk about that a little bit too tonight. I think you've done an excellent job of making that more well-rounded. It's not just about owners, mm-hmm. and this committee is kind of for everybody still too. Like, yeah, it's more focused down this avenue, but yet there's a lot of things that go into that avenue. Yeah. There's all kinds of different cars that come through here. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's great. Is there anything, like, looking back now, if you could have given yourself some advice now that, you know, you wish you'd known back when you were first starting out in this, or maybe a path you would have taken, or something else you would have done, or it's a lesson that you've learned that you're like, man, if I'd only known this would have really helped me out, or if I had this mindset. Mm-hmm. Is there something along those lines that you can think of that you feel
Let me
is...
think. When I look back at all the years of investing, there's been ebbs and flows. And I think the one thing that I thought was, I let the good life get in the way of the great life, right? So, you know, after when I started buying single families, we were comfortable because at that point in time, we had enough single families to offset my income. And that's when I let go of the pedal a bit. And we were comfortable. I didn't really feel that pressuring why as much because we had something on the side. I think for me, I wish I continued pushing forward. You know, I count. So there's this one perspective where you might get to a place of comfort, but sometimes that place of comfort would prevent you from pursuing what's great. And I felt that there's many times in the time of investing where I stopped buying properties or continue pursuing taking it to the next level because I was comfortable, right? So that there's that one perspective of not letting the comfort of whatever you're in preventing you from taking to the next step, right? And I also see that like with my friends, right? Like, you know, my best friend was comfortable with his W-2 job until they took it away, right? You never know what's going to happen the next day. And I think for me, there's that level of sometimes I might be too comfortable where I let go of the gas a bit that I felt like I should actually push forward. But on the converse, there's times where I felt like I was pushing too hard, right? So I was pushing too hard and being too myopic and like goal driven and like, I want to do this. And I was trying to push something when it really wasn't supposed to be pushed, that I think it was actually to my detriment. One example is that, so when we bought that property, the apartments in December 2019, and 17 months later, through COVID, we sold, right? Myself and the partners did really well on that property. Not just because of me, but a lot of things lined up out of my control for us to be able to sell. After that, we took off, and it just so happened that my wife also took a sabbatical. So that was the first time in maybe about 13 years that we did not have any professional obligations, right? So it's one thing where, you know, we go on vacation, we're still working W-2, we still pull out the laptop on vacation and did work, right? It's another thing where both of us had no professional obligations. She took a sabbatical, I just sold the asset, and we did well, right? And we went on vacation. We went like 7 different places in 2021, 22, and it was enjoyable, right? To a point where my wife was like, man, I can't keep doing this, right? Like, she's the type that she has to be busy and she works, right? So she went back to work, and I was like, I'm not ready to go back, right? And I think for me, so at that point in time, I decided to, there was an opportunity to volunteer at my local church just to kind of help out with some of those things that they needed help with because they were in transition. They didn't have a person in place to help with their administrative stuff like finance, organization. So I kind of filled that void in temporarily for them to be able to find the right person to fit that role. I had this struggle in me because at that time I was actually volunteering my time almost to a full-time basis. And this was probably almost 12 months after we sold the asset. So I'm not making any income. I'm not doing anything productive. And it's hard for me just to kind of sit still.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm volunteering on a full-time basis. And while I'm volunteering on a full-time basis, there's this internal struggle I have. I was like, man, I still need to be productive. Right. Especially like when I left my full-time job, it took me almost 8 months to fully come to terms that I left my job and I'm not going back. Right? If you're working in a full-time job, 9 to 5, being told what to do, know what exactly your priorities are, and then the next day you have no priorities and you got to figure out what to do, it does a number on you, right? Like there's many times where I thought about going back to work because it just felt so awkward out here where, I've been, institutionalized in some sense, and then all of a sudden I'm not, right? Work on my own terms. And then the income is dependent on my own effort versus in a W-2 job, whether I work or not, I'm still getting paid. It's kind of that feeling where you're like, man, I feel unsettled. Like I'm volunteering my time. I'm doing good. I feel like I'm contributing, but at the same time, I feel this struggle where I need to do something productive. Right. And, I struggle with this feeling of like, man, I gotta like go to work or do something where I can get validated with either, hey, this is your official position in the church, or you need to get a job so you get paid and you get validated, or you go look for a property, right? So I was kind of in that funny spot where I had this internal motivation, man, I got to push through. I got to do something, right? But at the same time, like I just felt like it was not right? Like I was in the position and helping out the church where I could, right? And so that, volunteer position for maybe about 6 months ended where I did move on because that desire is like, man, I got to go do something. I can't keep doing this forever and ever. So fortunately at that time, they did find somebody to be full-time staff to fulfill that position. I left, and that was in 2020. So I was volunteering probably in like 2021, 22, and then maybe the end of 2022, I think. And for me, there was this unreconciled feeling. It's like, man, I feel like I've kind of lost time, right? Like 8 months, 12 months, whatever it is, because I've just been doing stuff that did not really contribute to the family unit in terms of income. And, could you maybe call that as being unproductive, right? But then you feel like maybe not, because I feel like I was actually contributing to the church and doing something of value, right? And now in retrospect, right, like when I think about that struggle that I had when I was volunteering and not doing anything professionally related, I actually think that was a blessing. Because if you think of the 2021, 22, that's when everyone was buying properties on bridge loans. And if you don't know, people buying on 3-year notes, overvalued, inflation hit, and then now people doing capital calls, foreclosures, right? Sky's falling, everyone's selling their property, right? And when I see that in retrospect, I was like, man, I'm actually really thankful I didn't buy anything then. Because I could have easily took the profits, maybe do a 1031 from that property I sold in 2021, rolled it into an asset, maybe overpaid on a bridge loan, right? Like right now, people are selling at a loss. Right now, everyone's losing their equity on multifamily deals because of, deals that they bought that were overvalued. Now they're selling for below what the note value is and wipes out all the equity. And if I think about it, I was like, man, that could have easily been me. If I had said, go, right? Let me take this. Let me go buy another property. Let me go.
Because you just hit a big score.
Yeah, a big score. Let me just take that profit. And I was like, you know what? At that time, I was like, I need to decompress. I need time with my family because I've neglected them for like 17 months, right? So I said, let's play the taxes, partnership. I'm not buying a property. I'm going to disappear for a while. Right. And everyone was asking, like, hey, are you going to buy another property? Are you gonna buy I was like, no. Right. People still follow. Are you going to buy a property? Because they still think about that asset that I bought that scored big in 17 months, where they almost doubled their capital in 17 months. And instead, I just kind of took time with the family, volunteered at the church, and then just took my time, right? Like I've just been kind of like meandering around, right? And, I counterbalance that thought about, don't let that, good life come in the way of a great life, right? And don't let the gas pedal off, right? But at the same time, like if you're pounding over and over, that's going to get you in trouble. And I felt like if I had that perspective, I'm never going to give up, I'm going to double up, I'm going to build this enterprise, I could easily be on, the foreclosure steps, right? I could easily be filing for bankruptcy right now. And the thing is that I could not have foresaw what was going to happen until now, when I have that gift of hindsight. That if I had bought a property right after we sold and jumped right back into multifamily property, and kind of let that ambitious, like, oh, I want to go bigger and better, this, and that, overtake me, I would be in really big trouble right now. All right. I'd probably be divorced. I'd probably not see my kids. I'd probably file for bankruptcy, right? Like I'd probably try to dig out of this property that I bought. Instead, I felt like I've been able to contribute to the community in some form or fashion. But I think that taught me that it's okay to be patient and be still. I think my personality, and it has always been go, go, go. Let's achieve the next milestone. Let's go bigger, better. What's the next? What's next, right?
You stepped into your financial sensory deprivation tank is what you did.
Yeah. So I mean, like the fact that I kind of, whether, I had a lot of unsettling feelings during that period, right? Because it's counterintuitive to my personality.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, I was like, man, that was a gift. Right? To me, that it's hard to say one way or another, but it's really kind of listening to that unspoken voice of what's the right thing to do in that moment. For me, for my family, right? Despite that, like, hey, I want to go, reach the next net worth milestone.
Yeah, you just 10x'd your like biggest deal you'd done at that point.
Exactly, right?
I mean, that would have been really easy to get caught up and go
and get more investors.
Shit, I just scored big. Like, I'm going to do this again. Like, now these investors will give me double the money this time. Right. Like, let's go buy a 500 unit property and just go bananas.
Right. So it's not out of choice. It's out of circumstance. One of those gifts, again, that I was telling, that's out of my control, that, maybe God gave me, or kind of have this person kind of guiding my life. Yeah. At that time, I felt like, man, I was like, I feel like I'm wasting time here. I'm not doing anything productive. But in fact, doing nothing and being still was actually the right call in that moment because of that economic environment. And I did not know that until now, when I'm seeing, capital calls, people selling at a loss, I'm losing my money, that, man, like, I actually enjoy my life right now. I get to take my kids to soccer, to jiu-jitsu. I get to spend time with my wife. We just got back from Mexico, and we would not be able to do any of this if I had a property that was struggling. And I don't know how to really convey this into step 1, 2, 3, but it's really kind of listening to this unspoken voice of what's right in that moment for you and your family, because sometimes it's like, hey, you got to push the gas. Yeah. And sometimes, hey, it's okay to be still. Quiet that voice that you have in your head that, hey, you got to push through, because maybe there's something out there, right? Like I did not know, right?
Well, there's a variance there too, because you said before, you can't get caught up with the voice in your head and not make a decision. And it can't be from just a lack of, like, because you're scared or you don't feel like you know everything. It can't stop you from making a decision, but yet you also have to trust your gut.
Right.
I mean, because in this instance versus the one earlier where you were talking about where, hey, I'm doing all these things and I had to be poked to say, okay, great, you've done all this. Yeah. Now make a decision. But shit or get off the pot. so to speak.
I mean,
or then there's the other one where whatever that was, a God thing, a mental thing, whatever anyone wants to call it, after your biggest deal to date, at the time at least, you had everybody and their dog knocking on your door going, hey man, we just hit the lotto. You just 10x'd us. Let's go big. Let's 20x this next deal. And yet you're like, I'm good. Like, I still want to do great things. And yes, this is still part of my legacy plan and all these things and my why. But whatever reason, I'm having these other feelings that, like, I need to take a minute and sit back and reflect on this and see what lessons I've learned. The right thing hasn't popped up in front of me that I'm just feeling, you know, in my soul, I've got to go move forward with. I'm kind of feeling like right now I need to step back and do the soccer thing with the kids and the jiu-jitsu and go travel a little bit and just enjoy this moment for a minute, which sounds like out of your norm at the time, to some degree at least, that I want to devote a little more here, and things will still work out. And I've put all these other passive income things around me that, like, I'm good. I don't have to make a decision right now. So it doesn't mean just because I hit gold once, like, just keep pounding at it for a minute. But let's reflect upon the lessons learned here a little bit. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. I think it's more about what you said, but learning how to be content with what you have. Because I think there's always this temptation that I have, and maybe everybody has, of, man, I want what that person has. I want to go, you know, be at this level.
Yeah.
Right? And whether it be professionally or personally or wherever it is, right? And I think a lot of it is like, I'm actually okay. I'm learning how to be more comfortable in my own skin of, I'm actually okay where I'm at, right? You know, I got a loving wife, got loving kids. I'll do a deal when I want to do it, when it makes sense, right? And I think it's not, you know, I'm saying this where it rolls off my tongue, but, you know, it's not easy because there's that constant pressure of, you know, people I say, hey man, what are you doing, right? And, you know, sometimes it's hard to say, well, nothing really.
Success is addictive.
Yeah.
Success is addictive.
And they're like, yeah, I'm on my 4th property. Well, you know, I mean.
Yeah, no one's going to tell you failure is addictive.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
So, but, you know, at the same time, like, I'm starting to really enjoy the life stage where my kids are young. I get to participate where I could take them to soccer. I can take them to jiu-jitsu. I can spend time helping them with their schoolwork, right? And it might not necessarily be measured by like, hey, you know, like, you know, this guy has this many properties, this has this, and I, you know, don't really have any right now. But I think it's a constant battle that, you know, you have this external pressure and internal satisfaction that I'm learning how to be more comfortable with. And I think at the same time, I'm also learning, you know, that experience with volunteering, you know, at the church, right? It's analogous to what I'm doing with the association, right?
Yeah.
It's a volunteer position, right? I put in a lot of time in planning, you know, strategy, et cetera, and I'm not getting paid for it, which is fine, right? But my perspective has changed really where I don't always have to get something in return for my effort, because you know, what might happen in the future is something that I might not see today. Like, for example, like if I did not volunteer at that church in that time period, I would have hopped into another property and I would be destitute. Right? I'd be struggling. I would not be able to enjoy going to Mexico last week. I might not be able to enjoy to take my kids to soccer and jiu-jitsu. And I think my perspective has changes is that, you know, if I feel like I'm actually doing good somewhere, that's okay, right? I'm just fortunate that I can have that luxury to do that without expecting payment in return because of, you know, the investment passive income that I have now. But I think right now I'm more like, okay, you know, if I feel like there's a need in the IRO committee at the association, I'll just do it. Right.
Yeah.
I don't expect anything. I'm going to help people. Right. Like if there's people that want to get involved in real estate, sure, I'll sit down and help you where I can and help you get to and put you in the right direction. You know, I'm not expecting anything because I think my paradigm has really shifted from maybe after I graduate college, where every output I get, I have to get something in return. Now it's more like, you know, I could actually really enjoy that interaction and be present with, you know, just like this in their interaction, you and me, right? Like I would not be able to get to know you, right?
Yeah.
Or in the IRO committee.
It's like a humble servant attitude, I think, is what you've kind of adapted.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Grown at this point.
Because
there's still networking and deals and things that come down through, and you're still learning and growing at the same time. Like,
right.
You're putting yourself out there still. You're still staying involved. You're still learning. You're still growing. You might be not in the sense that you have for the past 5 years, but in another way that you're not out the game. You know, but it's I mean, you're bringing in new aspects and new thoughts. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I think people need to look at that. Like sometimes, you know, we just talked about this the other week with my friend Josh with Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, Josh is in a circle of very elite operators, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Rangers, all that stuff. I mean, he is 1099 with Echelon Front. He owns kickboxing gyms, but he's turned friendships. I don't want to say he's turned friendships. That's the wrong word, but he's built upon friendships and having a humble servant attitude and just wanting to be a part and putting himself in position to be a part and to serve and to help others that has led to 100 times what he ever thought. It was just his interest. Yeah, he read, you know, Extreme Ownership and was fascinated by what Jocko and Leaf said. And he happened to be friends with JP Donnell and didn't even know JP Donnell was a Navy SEAL when he first met him, or like that was part of the deal. JP's now one of his best friends. And even that, they were friends for a long time before he ever even volunteered to like hand out merch at an Echelon event. And like now he's like a pretty intricate part about that. And like those special operators dudes, they don't just let anybody into their circle. I mean, like, you know, like they paid a price to say I'm a frogman. And, you know, like not everybody can say I'm a frogman, you know, and like that I did these things. And if you're going to do business with those type of guys, they bring that same kind of mentality to everything. So, I mean, I think this is a trending or repeating thing that we see here a lot of times that, you know, if you have a passion for something or an interest in something, just finding ways to get yourself in that room and being humble and learning and doing it. Like not everything is, hey, Anthony, pay me this to do this, you know, like, hey, Anthony, how can I come help you? Like, what can I do to take a load off your shoulders? I want to learn about what you want to do, but like, can I come shadow you? I mean, I don't care what you do all day long. Like, can I, you know, just, there's little things like that if people start learning those tools of communication, and I don't care if we are talking real estate or you're talking about selling gizmo gadgets, whatever it is, if that's your thing, have those conversations and put yourself in those rooms. Don't be scared to do those things that everybody else is like, oh, that's weird, man. That's odd. Like, really, you're going to go sell T-shirts with this? Like, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I kind of did the same thing with a lot of the bands that I ran around with when everybody else was in college, you know, like, hey, what do you need help with? I'll run your little light kit. I'll help you run the soundboard. Oh, you need a guitar tech? You need me to restring that while you're over here? Oh, cool. I got you. Oh, you want me to go work the merch booth or help hand out CDs after the show? Like, cool. I got you guys. And I'm getting to hang out and do all this stuff. I can hang out backstage, ride around on the tour bus, like whatever the scenario is. But it's because I wanted to provide value. I wanted to learn. I wanted to see this. I wanted to really figure out how all this works. And I think if people took that approach to more things, like, man, it just opens up so many doors. You see things. And sometimes you're blessed with that opportunity, like you just said, and you didn't know all those things were going to happen, but because you did that, and even if it was like a timeout for yourself and just volunteering and doing those things, it saved your ass. And that you didn't even know that's what it was doing to some extent. Maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe you would have gotten another good deal. But for whatever reason, the timing wasn't right, and you chose this. Like, no harm, no foul, but you're still moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the IRO committee. I've talked about it a little bit, but tell everybody from your words, because you're the chair, man.
So I did not know this, but there's an association called the Apartment Association of Greater Dallas. It oversees about, I think, 13 or 14 counties of multifamily properties, so apartments.
I think it's one of the largest in the U.S.
Yes. So currently, I think they oversee about 7,000 units, which is maybe, if not the top or second in the nation in terms of how many apartments they oversee. Within the association, there's many different committees, but the one thing that the association stands for is that it's 100% focused on ownership, right? Ownership rights. So when I first was volunteering or voluntold into the committee, I was trying to understand, exactly, or other people. There's a committee, so there's many different committees. One of them is the Independent Rental Owner Committee, and what that is just investors, individual owners that own assets. So what that really means is that we're just a bunch of owners that kind of get together, and how can we support the ownership group in DFW, right? So typically the people that are part of the IRO committee are individual owners who own 100 units or less. Obviously it could be more, but when you start entering in the 150 to 300, you start entering in like the institutional space. So that's what the IRO committee is. And there's many different investment groups out in DFW, right? Lifestyles is one, and there's probably many others. And for me, I'm like, man, like when I first started the chair position, I was like, how is the IRO committee and the association different from all these different investment groups? And the only way that I've been able to reconcile it is that if you look at the life cycle of ownership of an asset, you have pre-closing activities, which is raising equity, business plan, pro forma. And then once you close, you have post-closing activity, which is operation and executing your business plan. To be able to reconcile that for me, I was thinking about investment groups are all focused on pre-closing activities, right? How do you raise equity, right? How do you underwrite a property? The apartment association is more on post-closing activities, okay? There's a Venn diagram where they overlap. There's a portion where some of the apartment association does focus on pre-closing and investment groups focus on post-closing, but in large and by on, it's that. Associations post-closing, investment groups are pre-closing, and that's how. Because if you think about the association, there's actual credentials on how to operate a community. There's CAPS, which is certified apartment portfolio manager. There's CAM, like there's all these institutional or structured programs on how to operate an apartment community, right? And I've taken them, and they're very well vetted, and I've learned a lot from them. But that's how you kind of segregate them. The one thing to note is that pretty much everybody, including leadership and the president of the association, is volunteer, right? I did not know that. I thought, which is surprising because
they all have full-time jobs.
They all have full-time jobs, right? So they must have some motivation to want to be able to take on a second job to help the association. And that's kind of where I fit. I'm the chair of one of the committees in the association, and one of them is the independent rental owner, which is pretty much synonymous to investors, individual investors. The other aspect I learned was if you think about all the other investment groups out there and the association,
And when investors think about, hey, I want to invest in this state, right? The one thing they look at is what's investor friendly in terms of local legislation and laws, right? Texas is landlord friendly. California is not, right? And to date, the only entity that I know that actually has stats that they preserve owner rights is the association. Okay, so that's where I view the value of the association, the apartment community, and the ownership community at large in any state or city is the local apartment association advocates for owner rights, and they actually have full-time staff, like Jason Simon, that pretty much keeps up to date with local legislation, advocates for local landlord rights. Whereas all these investment groups, they want to benefit from it, but they don't have full-time staff to devote to it, right? So in the ecosystem of ownership, that's the importance of the apartment association, is advocating for owner rights, making sure that it stays in check, and establishing relationships with local representatives to make sure that we are staying on top to make this continually owner friendly. So that's what the ownership, that's what the association is, at least from what I understand, in a nutshell. And then within the association, there's many different committees. IRO is one of it, Independent Rental Owners, but there's many different committees. I think there's maybe
there's a lot of them,
11 or 13 or somewhere in the teens.
Yeah.
But if you think about them and look at them and what the core purpose, all of them revolve around ownership. You got product services, you got business exchange, you got membership. And if you think about the core purpose, it's really to kind of feed that ecosystem of ownership. Right? And I didn't realize that something like this existed. And I kind of got involved as I was voluntold to get involved, and it kind of grew from there.
Yeah.
So.
And you decided to bite off a second one.
Yeah, exactly. So this year, this is my second year as being a chair. So what that means is I'm responsible for that committee, coming up with what the initiatives are for 2025. How do we add value to independent rental owners in the community? And it's not just apartment owners. There's single family owners, right? Because the laws for owners for apartments are the same for single family rental owners. When we go through eviction, it's the same for single family as is multifamily, right? So it's not such a clear cut of multifamily, single family in terms of legislation. It's the same. So my job really as a chair, as a volunteer chair, is to really corral the troops, cast a vision of volunteer committee members like yourself, and to be able to come up with initiatives on how we can add value to the independent rental owners of DFW as a whole, and also as a committee internally.
That's awesome, man. And I want to say to that note, if you have an interest in any of these things, and I don't want to short any of the other associations or anything else. The Fort Worth Apartment Association is great as well. I'm a member there. I do things with them. I did more stuff with the products and services in my early years at Element with Fort Worth. I've done stuff with AAGD. I am now, the only committee I am on or participating in right now is the IRO committee. Although the Fort Worth guy's trying to steal me over there to come help do that too.
Robert,
I don't have time to do all that.
He's mine.
Yeah. So, but my point in bringing this up is I don't fit currently the textbook definition of somebody that should, by a lot of people's minds, be an IRO committee member. I do not own a single property other than my home. It is something I want to work towards and that I'm trying to learn about. I had to look at it once I learned about it and see, how is this a fit for me? Yes, this is something I want to learn, but I don't want to waste these people's times. I don't want to feel like the guy that's in here like pitching and being like, hey, I'm the GC. I want to do all your rehabs and I can do all this for you. Like it's not about that. I mean, you could easily go down that road. I think that would be the wrong mentality or mindset to have going into it. But if you're curious and you truly want to learn about something, or you just have even the inkling, explore it a little bit, because this, from going to one of these open meetings and having 2, maybe 3 conversations with you, and you're like, you want to be on the committee? I'd really like to have you on the committee. And I'm like, holy shit, like that didn't even cross my mind. Like, I'm just happy to kind of be here and learning this. And honestly, like, the first meeting was like, man, this is way over my head. This is above my pay grade. I don't know if this is what I was like looking for or what I was supposed to expect, but let's go do a few more of these. Like, let's see what's going on here. Like, I feel like I'm going to learn something. There's going to be something of value here. Like, there's a lot of great, amazing people that, I mean, like, literally, I knew Val. Like, I didn't know a single other person in that room. And yet I go to every like AAGD like thing. We do the trade shows. We do the business exchange, all of that stuff. And I've been in this industry for 17 years. And at the time, I'd never even heard of the IRO committee. Or I just completely disregarded it because I was like, oh, it's an acronym that doesn't have anything to do with me. What do I want to do with that? Yeah. So I would just say, like, check it out and like ask questions. Like, I probably should have done more of this and sooner, you know? Yeah. And you're doing a great job of mixing and blending this and not making it to where you feel completely out of place. Or, we had some great discussions about like, I don't want to dumb down the committee and be like asking rookie questions the whole time, or be like, can you pause? Like, I don't understand this. Like, no, I'll send Anthony an email later on and go, all right, man, like, you are speaking Russian right now. Like, can you like break this down for me? Like, I didn't want to be that guy, the only one raising my hand, even though no one's asking questions right now, but I didn't want to derail this 30 minutes, but I think that's important. I think you should do that and like put yourself out there a little bit. Like, that's,
So to kind of build on that, I believe everybody can be an owner, right? In some form or fashion. When I first started, I felt like it was so far-fetched and out of reach. When I first met somebody, I owned nothing. I was green, spanking new, didn't know what a mortgage was, and I was just networking. And some guy said, oh yeah, I own 20 properties, and my eyes grew. I was like, you own 20 rental properties? Wow, I was starstruck, right? Yeah. And I felt like he was so far ahead of me that it was just so unfathomable. But now that I've kind of walked that, right, that I believe that it's not so far-fetched from anybody being an owner. And that's what kind of, it kind of pains me, like, that one person that's been in the industry for like 17 years and only the past 5 years they started the ownership track. I was like, man, right? Like, even like old coworkers, I'm just like, sometimes I'm trying to shove it too hard that they're like, it's not for me. I'm like, okay, I have to learn how to give them space. And then finally they come around. But I believe that ownership is for everybody. Okay. If you go back to the basics of why are you working, right? To get paid, to provide you for your family, right? Ownership is exactly the same thing, but it has the benefit of decoupling your earning potential from your time. That it's actually sustainable. It's less risk because you're not relying on your employer, that you can do this on the side, right? We're not talking about flipping one, but just buying passive income, right? And $50, $100, whatever it is, might seem very minuscule at that time, but it builds up, right? And I just have this passion that I believe everybody can be an owner, irrespective of how far you fetched you think it is, right? I did a talk for a friend who's a professor at UTD, right? Just saying, hey, look, I know you guys are all studying. You guys are trying to get a job out of college. I want to plant that seed about the ownership track. It's fine. Go get a job. But I want you to know that the sooner you can plant that seed of you being an owner, the better off you'll be, because there'll be a point in time where you're not going to be happy with your job. You'll be overlooked, or some job satisfaction that it's not going to work out. And even if you retire, what are you going to do? Right? Like, you're going to work till 60. Okay. Then what are you going to do? Right? What you're going to hopefully have a nest egg to live till 80 or until you die. I just believe that everybody can be an owner. Okay. And
absolutely.
And I think you just have to plug yourself in and surround yourself with people who are already there, so that it does not seem so far-fetched, because you realize that there's teachers, nurses, there's, engineers that are already owners doing this. And the second part is that once you kind of overcome that mindset, IRO at the apartment association is a great place to start, right? I'm not trying to sell it, because I'm a volunteer. I don't get commission or anything. We don't have any stepping memberships like, oh, after you join this, it's another 10 grand or 20 grand, right? Like, it's a great way to meet people that are already in the industry, plugged in with many different investment groups. And you can get a really unbiased view of like, hey, is Lifestyles good? I mean, I recommend you just go into the 2-day, because there's something you will learn. I guarantee you there's something you'll learn.
Yeah.
And if not, you might go to the apartment association and they might introduce you to other people who might invest in self-storage, other asset classes, or just investment groups out there that can expand your world of possibilities. The worst thing that you can do is just kind of stay in your W-2 job and not do anything, and then think that this is what's going to provide for you for the rest of your life. I think that you have to really get plugged in to kind of at least just open your mindset of what's available out there. And the association's kind of like a non-threatening way to get there.
Yeah, and there's people of every background, every ethnicity, race, religion, creed, whatever you want to say, and of every different level within that you can imagine. Like, even if you think you would be like I remember one of the guys, like, he's like, I just got my first property. And you were like, how long have you been doing this? I've been looking for 3 years. And this, I think they were a couple. If I'm wrong, don't shoot me. But, this couple, like, basically, like, we just did our first deal. It just closed like 45 days ago. And they got up and talked about it for a minute. And like, here I'm thinking, like, I'm like the only one in here that doesn't have a residential rental or a multifamily thing here. And it's like, no, there's other people here like this too. Like, not everybody. And that guy's an insurance broker, and that guy's this, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, but they all are part of the game and like the industry, and they all want to understand. And like, there's a lot of people that really want to pass on that knowledge and like share that stuff with you. And all you have to do is start the conversation or ask. Like, there are so many people that truly want to share and help. Like, it's not an ego thing, and there's no like hidden agenda there, where like people are real that I've encountered, There's no gatekeeping. It's not like, I have $1 million, I make $1 million a month, and I've got 500 units and this and that. Like, there's none of that shit, man. Like, and I bet money the one that looks the least likely to have that is probably the one that has that in there. And you would never guess. The guy that has one property, you'd probably think he's like the head of some big fund or something. Like, you just really don't know. So like, again, like, that's kind of one of my points that I always say, like, make yourself a little uncomfortable, put yourself around the right people, put them in the room, put yourself out there, like, do it. Now, I want to be really respectful of your time, because I don't even know if you know yet, but we've gone for like a full 2 hours and like 10 minutes here at least. And I want to be thankful for, you even agreeing to do this. If you're up for it again, we will definitely have to do this again down the road and carry this on, because as you guys saw, like, I have like 4 pages of things I wanted to get through with him. He had me skip through a lot of it because he answered so many of these within the answer to other questions that I didn't get to get there. But I don't want to be disrespectful of you guys' time or your time at all. So we end every show with two things. Okay. Now I get to find out if you did your homework.
I didn't.
I knew he did, because there's no way he didn't. He was like cramming.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. So we like to ask everybody a couple of questions, because it's Common Sense, the podcast. And before I do that, I also want to challenge you a little bit, because you said you might not ever do another podcast. This might be the only podcast you do.
This is the only podcast I've done.
It's the only one you've done, but man, you really need to do, I mean, like, I would challenge you, if you ever get asked again, like, please do it. Like, you are a great teacher. You have a great story. Your message is very clear, clean, precise. You're well-spoken. I mean, I knew this was going to go like this just from the way you carry an IRO meeting or an open or closed meeting. Like, I knew this was going to be good and people would get immense value from this. So thank you. But if you got to leave your kids with one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
One? Only one?
For you, yes, because you're very articulate. Unless you want to be here for 30 minutes.
Yeah. You know what? One thing I'm trying to do right now with jiu-jitsu and soccer and just many other things is, I don't know if it's about leaving them with advice or teaching them, but I'm trying to reframe what failure means to them. So in the context of my experience, I've learned the most from failing, right? You probably heard that in many different books, but
absolutely,
it's much harder to learn from that than it is to say it. And, you know, when I am comfortable in doing things, I actually don't learn much. When I am out in chaos and like scrambling, my back is against the wall, that's when I learned most about myself, the people around me, and just life in general. And I notice that I think naturally kids, right, they want to gravitate to things that they're good at and just focus on that. And that's one thing I like about jiu-jitsu for my daughter and also my son is that you don't get better by winning your matches. You only get better when you get submitted, right? Because especially for youth sports, right? In jiu-jitsu, right?
You got to roll against people that are better than you.
Because it's only at that point in time when they submit you that they reveal holes in your game, okay? And there's two things happening. One is you admit defeat, and it's a submission of your ego, okay? And two, it's getting back up and going right back into that environment. Right? So there's that two things happening, right? Most people get back up, I'm quitting, right? And I think at least my experience and observation with jiu-jitsu is that, at least for youth, is that obviously it's like a sport, everyone wants to win. I think at least with jiu-jitsu, at least in the competitive scene, is it's a great medium to create teachable parenting moments with your child. And that's what I'm trying to do with my daughter and my son is that it's more parent driven where I have to push them. Right? There's times where my son got submitted, he's 8. And obviously when the other kid raises a hand, it's like, oh, tapped, right? Other kid raises, you're in front of this big stadium of people and he's crying, right? Like, and my heart aches and I'm like, ooh, right? Like,
yeah. And your sister just took gold.
I know. And I'm like, I want him to win, right? As much as it is a journey for the child, it's also a journey for the parent.
Yeah.
Because they are an extension of you.
Yeah.
And I want them to win. And sometimes I have that proclivity to be able to orchestrate and say, I want you to go against the easier kid, so you can win. But at the same time, I know it's not good for their growth, that I want them to lose. And And I want them to go to against kids that are better than them so they can lose. Not to a point where like, hey, I'm going to go get smashed by the next kid, but it's within range that like, I think I'm going to lose, but there's this chance that I can win, right?
If I do everything
If
right.
I could do everything right, you can win. And there's times where my daughter has lost, right? And it's taken time for me to really understand from a parent, at least using jiu-jitsu as a forum or as a medium to teach them that there's a time I remember that my son, he lost and he's just crying, bawling, like heaving. And I'm like, oh man, this is so hard to watch. And he comes off the match. I'm trying to hug him. He doesn't want to, he pushes me off. And I'm like, I feel offended. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, he needs space. But at the same time, I was like, dude, you got to get together because I hate to say this, but like, you got to go back for the third place match. Right. So to be able to kind of turn that switch of like, I just got humiliated, my ego got submitted, and be able to turn around and to be able, okay, whatever just happened, I got to wipe the clean slate and I got to perform. Yeah. And I have to learn how to cut that experience of loss and to be able to go into the next match and bring it and win. And honestly, like for me, I felt like I could not do that. Yeah. But like kids surprise me, man. Like, cause like my kid, like Hunter, my kid, he goes around, goes in, fights like no other, and he submits the kid. And I'm like, just happy for him. Yeah. Right. Because he's able to disconnect the loss of humiliation of being submitted in an armbar. You know, it's a reflection of, you know, you can internalize that as like, man, I failed, but then you have to be able to cut that off, turn around and go. Right. So I think my goal with jiu-jitsu and just like a lot of things is reframe what failure means. And I think a lot of times I'm also trying to learn that myself, seeing that my kids go through that. Because my daughter goes through that, right? There's times where you said that.
How old is your daughter?
She's 11. She's been doing jiu-jitsu for a while.
Has your kids, have they read the Warrior Kids book by Jocko?
Yes.
I was say you need to throw that out there.
But like for my daughter, like she's gone against some people that are above her, and she had like one opportunity to pull an armbar, but she hesitated, missed her opportunity, and lost. By points. And that was a parenting moment when I say, Hanley, you know, like, you know, you had your chance, right? This is a learning lesson for you to learn that, you know, when you have the opportunity, you got to take it. And if you don't take it, it passes. And if you pass it, you leave it up to judges. You leave it to the judge's decision if it wins by points, right? Mm. And one thing I'm trying to teach them in jiu-jitsu is never leave it to the judge's decision, because if it's tied in points, it's up to the judge's decision. And I said, this is one lesson, and I want to teach you is hard work, right? Like you work your butt off. Do not leave it up to other people's decision on the outcome of your success, right?
That's awesome.
So I grilled that intern, and then so she had like this championship match with AGF like last year, and she went against this girl that beat her, and they're rolling back and forth. She's losing by points, this and that, and there's this one opportunity. She grabs her pocket grips of her pants. She trips. She leaves her hands out to grab the floor, and she grabs the arm, pulls an arm bar, and she taps, and she wins. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? Because given 2 years later, she went against another girl where that arm was there and she didn't take it because she hesitated because of her mindset, the 80%. Mm-hmm. This time she sees the arm, takes it, boom, arm bar, she wins. Boom, right? She wins the championship, right? And I'm just like, man, like there's so many anchor moments in jiu-jitsu for youth that I refer back to her. I was like, look, you know, you failed back then and look where you are now. You have so much to be proud about, right? And it's about capitalizing opportunity, right? When you see it, you take it. And it's about like, you know, one thing I credit to her jiu-jitsu professor is that you have to make sure your mindset, right? Half the time it's about like, hey, let's make sure technique, you know, all this, that, you know, but he's like, you have to make sure your mindset's there, right? And that's one thing I kind of overlooked, and that now it kind of like, I've kind of come full circle with other aspects of business and stuff, that a common theme is mindset is everything. The person that is not as skilled, right, but has more of a positive mindset of themselves, has a more chance of winning a match than person who is more skilled but has a negative mindset of themselves in youth. Mm-hmm. And I think that carries along with many different things.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's one thing I'd like is I'm trying to work with them is redefine what failure means. It's okay to fail, right? Like soccer, right? Like right now they're in the School of Forms Academy where it's focused on 1v1s, right? Like a lot of soccer is about like passing, right? Mm-hmm. This is one school that just focuses on 1v1s. And typically when you get the ball and you're taking 1v1, you have this natural anxiety of like, oh man, this person's coming at me. What am I going to do? And then all of a sudden you freeze and you lose the ball, right? So their philosophy is overriding that anxiety of constantly exposing you to that anxiety of 1v1. That all of a sudden you're okay, I'll do it. I fail, okay, fine, I'll do it again, right? And that's all their practices is like constantly equipping you with the skills and exposing you with that anxiety of this person approaching you, and you just having that freedom of doing something,
make your
doing
decision.
the skill. Yeah. And if you screw up, fine, right? Worst is that somebody scores on you, fine. Worst is that happens, right? You know what? The world didn't end. Keep going. And then when you realize you're at the bottom of the of what's worst to happen, it's not actually that bad. And that's when you actually continue to say, okay, if I know what the worst is that can happen and I'm not afraid of it, that's when you actually have the freedom to really express your personal creativity and intelligence, and really kind of your personality as a person comes out, whether it's through sports, through academics, through your job, where you're not encumbered by this mindset of, man, I have this self-talk that's hindering you from being who you are. And you're like, I really don't care if I fail because I know I'm going to learn from it and just keep going. And I think that really is something that I'm trying to teach them through either soccer or jiu-jitsu or just any avenue or medium I can think of, is reframing what failure means.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. That's great, man. All right. Last but not least.
Yeah, what was the second question?
Second question is more like, we like to call this segment, give us your 2 cents.
2
so
cents.
like if there's anything I didn't ask you or something that's come up or that's still on the back of your mind that you didn't get to share, or maybe it's just, you know, your parting words. It can be any or all of the above, but it's Anthony Yeung's 2 cents.
2 cents. So, you know, I don't know how much time do we have?
We're way past that, so
way past
fucking
that.
rock and roll, bro.
So, you know, this is something that has been evolving, that I've kind of come to terms in the past maybe like 6 months, right? I've shared this in the last meeting where, you know, obviously, you know, I am in the real estate field, and I'm assuming that a lot of people may be watching, or maybe even yourself, is how do I get involved in real estate? And I think a lot of advice out there is tactics. Do single family, do fix and flips, do wholesaling, do self-storage, do this and that. And it's hard to really say one way or another because it's so personal. And one thing I'm trying to do is be able to abstract that to a higher level of thinking, that it's more principles, right? Principles on investing, on how to be successful and take it to the next level. And really, I've kind of distilled my experience in the past 13 years or 14 years to really 4 things, right? If you want to get into real estate, or if you want to invest, or if you want to take your financials to the next level, there's really 4 things that I've kind of learned doing things the wrong way, on what that means. And it's not necessarily saying, hey, here are the tactics that you need to do, which is single family, multifamily, either or, wholesaling, single family, whatever it is. It's really 4 things. And the first thing is you gotta benchmark what your safe rate is, right? Your safe rate is what is your risk, your perceived risk-free return rate that you can earn today, right? So most people's risk-free rate is 4% because of the high yield savings account, right? And I think that everybody should be attempting or trying to increase their safe rate each year, every year. So right now it's 4%, try to get to 5%, get to 6%, get to 7%. And what that means is that what's your perceived risk-free return rate that you can earn on your money? And what that means is that, through experience, most people says, if I'm not involved in any type of alternative investments, it's high yield savings account, 4%, if that is what it is. But as you start investing in alternative investments, it might be 6%, 8%, 10%. Right now, mine is 10%. And I'm looking to increase it to 12% each year or 14%. So I think that's one thing that everybody should be looking at is what is the rate of return of your money that you can increase, that you can earn a return on your money. The second thing is your risk profile. Okay, so you have to take a personal assessment of what your return profile, your risk return profile is, and if you can assess that, Les, is that mine might be like a gallon paint bucket. Yours might be 2-gallon paint bucket, and what that means is that how much risk are you willing to take at one point in given time that it's within a tolerable range. So if I'm willing to take a certain amount of risk for whether it be, hey, a risk of a job, your job is a risk because it's at the risk of somebody else paying you. It could be, hey, I'm going to take on this value deal. I'm going to take on this new business. Holistically in your life, what is your risk profile? And if you take an inventory of all your risk, is it within your risk profile or not? Some people is way beyond the risk profile. And if it is way beyond, you got to start contracting that within your risk profile so that you can start taking on more risk. And some people is way below or within their risk profile. They actually got to start taking on more risk because in real estate or anything, there's risk-adjusted return. The higher return you get, the more inherent risk there is, right? So I think you have to kind of start looking at your life holistically and figure out what's your risk profile and how much risk do you currently have? Is there a way that you can start eliminating it? And it might be, hey, I got to buy some rental property so that I have some passive cash flow to reduce my risk profile of relying on my job, right? And if you do that, then you can take on more risk like, hey, I'm going to go multifamily now and I'm going to quit my job, or I don't really care if I lose my job because I already have income, right? The third part is earned income versus passive income, right? Active or passive, right? So that is that over time you have to think about what is all the sources of income that you're getting each year. Okay, is it tied to your time where it relies on your effort, or is it not? Because you want to be able to start structuring your income sources so that it is not tied to your time. And it is okay to have income sources tied to your time, but you don't want that as your only source of income. You want some that is passive, right? So that's the third aspect. And the fourth aspect is that capital growth versus cash flow. Okay. When I look at all the assets that I've owned, the most incremental boost that I have on my net worth is stuff that has capital growth. And capital growth is things that have sold, right? So things that I invested in that did not produce cash flow, but ended up selling or refining in 2 years, ended up having a more incremental impact on my net worth than things that cash flowed. And the thing is that once you kind of worked on those three initial principles of safe rate, your risk profile, then you start doing cash flow investing, right? To eliminate your risk. Then you got to go capital growth assets where you are willing to take on more risk that you don't need the immediate cash flow, but you got to go for stuff that is capital growth, right? Like value deals, right? Where you're willing to take on the risk of taking value deals where it has a potential of a higher return in 2 years or 5 years, but you're okay with no cash flow because you have the other aspects of leg 3, you got to start taking those risks to catapult your net worth, right? And that's where I feel like those 4 guiding principles, that when I look at my investing career in the past, 10, 12 years, you have to constantly work on those 4 things, right? Because if you don't, that's where you can become complacent. If you constantly say, hey, my safe rate is 4%, right? The another value is when you have a safe rate of 4%, you benchmark every investment that you invest in on that safe rate. Because if you have a safe rate of 4% and somebody brings an investment at 2%, you're not going to do it because you can earn easily 4%, right? You have to have a safe rate to benchmark all investment that you invest in. So, an example is that if your safe rate's 4% and someone brings an investment at 10%, okay, the spread is 6%. Well, what's the risk involved in that earning 6%, and how likely is that going to happen, right? At least you have a benchmark and say, is that risk worth it for that 6%? And then you do that 6% if it is. And if it's not, then you don't do it. But you have to have some type of discipline in how you invest and how you approach investment philosophies. And that's something that I really kind of contemplated in the past maybe 3 to 6 months when I look back at all the investments I've done, things that really impacted our net worth. You can invest in cash flowing stuff all you want, which is good, but really there's stuff that has sold that has really impacted our net worth much more than anything has cash flow in the years that we owned it, which really kind of evolved that once you kind of have that cash flow to eliminate that risk in your life, you got to start going through for that risk adjusted return on capital growth assets. So it's really those 4 things.
That's badass, man.
I know that's a lot.
He's going to regret saying that because I'm going to be blowing his ass up to dive into that deeper with him on my own personal level, as I'm going to rehash this. I know without a doubt this has been, especially for the majority of our listeners and people that tune in regularly, this is probably going to be one of the more impactful episodes for you guys. He just shared an immense amount of information and awesome. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better 2.5 hours for you guys here, breaking this down for you. So again, man, thank you so much for doing this. Yeah. I had an absolute blast doing this with you. I hope you'll do more of these. We will be back again next week for you guys. So please tune in again next week, and please share, comment, subscribe, follow. Those things really help us grow the show, and we hope you'll join us again next week. Y'all, peace.